Hello, I'm Bob Paxton, and this edition of FAIRtax Power Radio was actually recorded several days ago, but unfortunately in the meantime, my partner of over 6 years of doing this show, Ron Malero, he passed away this morning, Thursday, August 26th at around 10:30. So we'd ask the FAIRtax Power Radio audience to please keep the family in prayer. And I do have something in the works for next week's program. I'm going to be talking with another one of the FAIRtax Candidate Pledge signers. So we will be back here as usual next week at 8 o'clock at Eastern Time on the FAIRtax official Facebook page. Beyond that, we'll just kind of have to see what we get. But for right now, everyone, just please remember the Malero family in prayer. Thanks, and God bless everyone.
Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton, and that's your cue.
And I'm Steve Hayes.
We'll make you an honorary one today and say we are the FAIRtax guys. I certainly appreciate Elaine stepping in and filling in for Ron over the past couple of weeks, but having to call ourselves the FAIRtax people, I'm sorry, was just awkward. So I'm glad to have you along with me today.
I'm always delighted, boss.
Real quickly, for anybody who might not know you, Steve is the president of the national group Americans for Fair Taxation, and you've been working on trying to get rid of the income tax for longer than the fair tax has been around.
Yes, started in 1990. We called ourselves Citizens for an Alternative Tax System, or CATS. That's, you can tell it was a homemade group. We just thought, what would be a good acronym? And we made it work with CATS. So basically, that's when it started. We actually got a bill introduced. And then in through the 90s, we worked closely with the guys in Houston with AFFT. And then when Billy Tozan resigned in 2000, we became merged with AFFT and FAIRtax.
Yeah, and you will admit to being a recovering tax attorney, I believe.
I'm afraid so, yes.
Okay. Well, you know, the first thing we do here on FAIRtax Power Radio is my favorite segment. We dig into congress.gov, and I'm anxious to hear your commentary on some of this stuff, because you've been up there rubbing elbows with Congress critters, lobbyists, a bunch of people up there alike. So you've got a little better insight into this than most people do. But here we go. Our first one today is H.R. 5082, a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to clarify the definition of a broker and for other purposes. Now, what's really cool here is the next bill on the list, H.R. 5083, is to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to clarify the definition of a broker and for other purposes. How many acts of Congress does it take to clarify the definition of a broker?
Well, and you know, part of the absurdity of this is that you really start to see the insanity of the federal income tax when you start looking at how these people operate. More than likely, they got paid, Bob, a fee from some lobbying group, indirectly, not directly, but they bought seats at a fundraiser or whatever to drop a bill on behalf of a client. Now, it could be a really good bill. It could be a bill that they never expect to go anywhere, because part of the job of a lobbyist is to not necessarily get something passed, but to get it introduced. And if he can tell his client, hey, look, Bob, all that money you paid me, look what happened. I got 8 bills introduced the way you wanted them. It's not my fault that they didn't get passed. But boy, I got you across the starting line. I got you in the game.
All right.
And that's why there are so many of these, Bob. If you go back and look at them, there are so many bills that never, ever get to committee. They never even get considered.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, the fair tax is one of them. It's been there for 20 years and it's never even gotten a hearing in committee.
It's there. Well, actually, we had one House hearing on it back when Bill Archer was in the 90s, when Bill Archer was chairman. But it hasn't been formally submitted for consideration. You're totally correct, in the committee. in the Ways and Means where it should be.
Well, go ahead.
But that's just a situation where we have real legislation. And of course, our reason for not being picked up is totally different than theirs. Our reason is they're scared to death to start talking about this, because with a straight face, how do they defend the present system?
I guess they don't. But back to your point, what we do here, we go to congress.gov, we put the phrase Internal Revenue Code in quotes, so you're searching on the entire string. And to your point earlier, that search, as we speak today, 1,182 hits.
Right.
So that probably doesn't surprise you at all. But
not at all.
Let's move on here a little bit. The HR 5078 to amend the Internal Revenue Code to increase the amount that can be withdrawn without penalty from individual retirement plans as first-time homebuyer distributions. Don't you just love it when the tax code tells you what you can do with your own money?
It's the smart guys in DC deciding what is best for you and me.
Yeah. Well, what's crazy here, if you talk about they're going to let you withdraw from your retirement plan to help you as a first-time home buyer. Now, usually first-time home buyers are fairly young and have not built up a very large retirement plan at the time they do that. So I thought that was kind of crazy.
Well, but, it is, but there's a large percentage of people who have been, who are in their, 30s and early 40s that are now looking to buy homes that have been traditionally renting because they lived in the big cities, and now they're moving out and they're looking to buy a home. So it's probably, my guess is it's in response to that.
All right, moving on, HR 5050. This is the Social Security Enhancement and Protection Act of 2021. Now, don't you just love it when the title of the bill says one thing and the content of the bill says something else? This one actually has some text in it. We look at these, in the most recently introduced order, and a lot of times the text is not available to us. But this one is the Social Security Enhancement and Protection Act is largely a bunch of sections increasing benefits for certain groups of people who just happen to be traditional constituencies of the sponsor's political party. I'm sure that's a total coincidence. There's also an amendment to the Internal Revenue Code in that bill, amends section 1,402. Now, the actual text is rather gobbledygook, but I thought the key was there are at least 1,402 sections to the Internal Revenue Code. And of course, if you really want to protect and enhance Social Security, pass the FAIRtax.
100% agree. It's all waving arms and getting political donations, Bob. It's all a game up there.
Yeah, one more quick one, HR 5038. This is Preserving Direct Seller Independence Act. There's text in this one too. It's a very short bill that just kind of expands on the definition of who is an employee. And I thought the real cool part of this one, there's a text in there that says the term employee excludes any person identified in section 3,508 of the Internal Revenue Code. Do we need the tax code to tell us what an employee is? Do we need 3,508 sections in that code? I guess you would probably say no.
I would say no. I mean, it's funny. Back when I was doing tax work, it wasn't nearly as big as it is now. But when we were starting to do it, it was a wonderful thing that it was so complex. Why? Because people paid me a lot of money to help them. And that's really kept the Internal Revenue Code going. Not only is it a social control mechanism, but it's also a great moneymaker for lots and lots of people. If they can pass on the tax that they would ordinarily pay to the rest of us, Bob, that's worth a lot if it's a big amount of tax.
It is.
And that's the problem with the Internal Revenue Code, is it's not really a collection facility for the government as it is a control mechanism for the government and a way of soliciting bribes, which is what they are.
Yeah, well, as I say, I've always thought that the best argument we can make for getting rid of the tax code is to show people what's in it. That's why we do this segment on FAIRtax Power Radio every week.
I think it's very smart because most people don't have any idea, if they don't deal with it, how convoluted and complex and frankly crazy it is and the reasons behind it. And so I think it's wonderful that you're going through and at least showing them how stupid it is.
Well, let's move on. A couple of times that we've been dealing with these what happens if scenarios. And I've got another one that I want to throw at you. This is from our buddy Lance. He sends us some really good stuff every now and then. He wrote, "Dear FAIRtax guys, what happens to long-term stable investing if the FAIRtax passes? Don't current tax laws encourage long-term slow and steady investing over time, creating generally stable markets? And don't current tax laws penalize hopping in and out of investments? That's the kind of activity that leads to market volatility, bubbles, and otherwise unstable markets." So how would you address Lance's question here?
Well, his points about unstable markets are correct, that you have people jumping in and out. The present tax code really, I don't believe, has much impact on that. Because if you are trying to what's called arbitrage the market, in other words, take advantage of differences in prices, you're doing that and it's going to be ordinary income no matter what. So I don't think that is affected much by the tax code. But his point on what happens if you hold investments longer is a very valid point, because under the present tax code, if you hold it for a year or longer, until Biden changes the law, you're entitled to get a preferential tax rate. And in fact, under the present income tax and estate tax law, if you held it all the way until you passed on, all of the growth in the investment would not be subject to tax. And again, Biden wants to change this, but when it went into your estate and was passed on to your heirs, it would receive what's called a stepped up basis in value. Meaning if you bought something for $1 30 years ago, and it's now worth $30, instead of paying tax on that $29, what would happen is that you would have it go to your heirs. And if they turned around and sold it for $30, they would pay no tax, because the basis, the price at which they were deemed to have bought it, is $30.
So in other words, you're responsible for taxes only on the appreciation value of an asset when you actually held it.
Yes, and at the date of death, it gets marked up to the value at the date of death.
Yeah, if you pass it on a second time.
Yes, but here's the situation. You may have an investment that you think is going to be long-term. Mm-hmm. You may have purchased a stock and then, or a company or anything. And then you decide that you have a better use for that money. Under the present system, when you sell that asset, which by the way, you had to buy with discounted dollars, because let's say again, that asset was $1. Well, how did you get the dollar to make the purchase? Well, you got it in almost every case from earning the dollar. In order to net $1 after taxes, you probably had to make $1.20, $1.25, whatever. So that dollar investment cost you $1.25. Mm-hmm. When it's sold, and let's say it has to be sold fairly soon, let's say it's a good investment, it appreciated at $5. Well, then you have to pay tax on $4 of gain. Mm-hmm. That's under the present system. Under the FAIRtax, the great thing about it is that we're totally agnostic as to how long you hold the stock. We want you, Bob, to decide, or Lance, when to sell based on economic reasons and family reasons or other considerations. And tax is really not an issue of any kind. Mm-hmm. Because if you buy it for $1 and you sell it for $5, it's an investment. There's no tax. But also, more importantly, if you buy it for $1 under the FAIRtax, you only had to make $1 to get the dollar.
I got
because when you purchase something is when you pay the FAIRtax, and when you purchase an investment, it's not subject to the fair tax. So
All right.
Lance, you're totally correct. Under the present system, you're rewarded if you keep it a long time, but you're not rewarded in the sense that you don't have the same easy in and out of investments based upon particular needs and wants of the individual. We're talking about taking control back and not having to be concerned that if we need the money for our kids' college, we're going to lose 25% of that money in taxes.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be able to make the decision, and we get all of the money. And in my example, if we made $5, we pay no tax, so we give $5 to the child's tuition. And again, there's no tax on tuition. So we get to make 100% dollars use all the way through and not have anything diminished by the tax on wealth and creation, which is the income tax.
Okay, well, I got another question for you here real quickly, but a couple more points to Lance's question that I thought of. You know, if you tax something, you get less of it. And under the fair tax, taxes on investments go absolutely to zero. So you could not encourage investment with the tax code any more so than you could with a fair tax. And you're also talking about the constantly changing tax laws. We uncovered this little gem in our congress.gov segment a couple of weeks ago, that there is a bill now, HR 4962, that will provide that the stock of certain corporations is eligible for that preferable tax rate, i.e. capital gains rates, only if such corporation maintains a plan for distributing equity to employees. So the federal government is always messing with people's investment decisions or the environment in which those decisions are made. And you can't make smart choices when the rules keep changing.
Well, you can't. And that's actually a very good point, is that if you don't have a stable system to plan on, it's very difficult to plan. It's, you know, you can equate it to the Weimar Republic or Venezuela or whatever, where you get your pay and you better get to the market within the next 10 minutes, because if you wait till the end of the day, things have gone up 20%.
Okay.
Well, that's the same kind of uncertainty that comes into investment planning or any kind of investment under the present system. And it's also really crazy to me, Bob, and I'm just going to make this point because I think it's critical. People think, well, if we make this rule on these corporations, particularly if they're, you know, private or public, but more importantly, public, we're not going to really hurt anybody. You know, we're just going to penalize the corporations. And of course, everybody can laugh at that understands it, because the corporations are either going to raise their prices, which most of them will try to do. They're going to cut back on employee wages and other costs, but mostly employee wages are the most susceptible to cutbacks, or not give raises, but keep the cost down. Or the third thing is they're going to give less to the shareholders. Now, what happens with companies when they're in your 401k or your other retirement plan? They get valued based on their earnings. If their earnings go down, what happens to their value?
It goes down. Yes.
What happens to your 401k?
It goes down.
If you punish somebody for investing in a company by not giving them capital gains tax treatment, there'll be less people investing in that company, or the price will have to come down to offset the 25% benefit of the tax change. So what happens to people that own that stock? It becomes less valuable. What happens to your retirement plans? They become less valuable. So all of this stuff is really crazy when they say that, because either they raise the price, which politicians love, by the way, because it gets passed on through to other people and they never know it, or they cut the pay of the individuals or keep them from getting more pay, or don't hire as many, or lay off people. And they love that. Why? Because they can point to these mean, wicked corporations that are abusing the worker.
All right,
so it's a game.
We need to move on here pretty quick. Our time's getting away. A really quick question from Pratt, and I guess this is pronounced Stair, S-T-E-H-R. It says, according to HR 25 in its current form, how could the 23% nominal sales tax rate change? Would it be a simple majority in Congress, a supermajority, or could the Treasury Secretary do it unilaterally? You got about 30 seconds. I want to move on to something else.
It depends on the Congress. Congress, by a majority vote, can change it. The great thing is, though, everybody in America will see it the next day. It's not something they can hide.
All right, we got about 7 minutes left here, and we've spent the last couple of programs talking about this new FAIRtax marketplace. We've talked about how it works, how people can use it, how vendors can sign up for it. I want you, as the president of Americans for Fair Taxation, to take a look at that thing from another perspective, the back end, if you will. What would it mean to AFFT to have a steady, reliable source of income from the marketplace that we don't have now? And you say you got about 7 minutes.
Well, I won't take probably 7 minutes, but what it allows us to do is enhance our ability to reach out and communicate with people. It allows us to have better social media presence. It allows us to contact the members directly in their districts, and people, target key areas of their districts and contact them. It allows our organization to grow. At this point, we don't pay any salaries. None of us take a salary. In fact, we don't even pay our own. We pay our own expenses.
Yeah.
But basically, what happens is that we're not going to be using the money for that. But can you imagine if I could go to a targeted district like Kevin Brady in Texas? Is retiring. There are a number of people running to replace him. Several of them have already endorsed the FAIRtax.
One of them's already signed the pledge. We're going to talk to him is here shortly.
Yes. And if we go to that district, and if we by zip code identify likely voters, it's all available. It's just expensive. And then we start targeting those voters and start bringing up and explaining the FAIRtax and getting them to ask the question of the candidates at the forums and all. We're going to see not a couple of candidates, but almost all of them supporting the FAIRtax. And that's the kind of thing you can do with additional funds. You can expand your reach, but more importantly, expand your efficiency and effectiveness.
I have always thought it would be good if we could break the medium moratorium on talking about the FAIRtax. I remember when you were on talking to Stuart Vardy, he kept trying to direct you away from the FAIRtax. He says, that'll never happen. Let's talk about stuff that makes sense. He never would let you make your point. But if we were an advertiser on his show, then we'd have a little more, leverage with him.
It would be a huge difference. But we can actually, there are lots of shows that we could be on if we had a more aggressive ability to do booking. I mean, let's just face it, a lot of these shows, they put people on because of people they know that are bringing them in, bookers. And, I remember back in the 80s, or in the 90s, I got a call from a person and he said, for $5,000, I can get you on the Tonight Show tomorrow night.
Yeah.
I didn't have $5,000.
Right now, we don't have the $5,000. So that's the invitation.
But that's an example.
Yeah. I just like to imagine in my mind, Randy Fisher talking to Tucker Carlson. Think about that for a second. Now, Randy's probably watching and saying, what?
No, and Tucker Carlson, we've had people talk to him when he did book signing. He likes the FAIRtax, but remember, Fox has the reason Stuart was so concerned with me talking about the FAIRtax is that Fox has an actual ban on talking about the FAIRtax.
But if
along with the other networks.
If we were advertisers on their network, they couldn't do that anymore. That's the whole point.
Well, they probably wouldn't do it. No, you're right. They'd probably allow us to do things, but there's lots of other sources of media that we could get on that would promote understanding of the FAIRtax, because that's really all it is, Bob, is you wake people up, you let them know that they have the power to change this. Why? Not by giving $1 billion to Congress, but by simply letting them know, if you don't do something that's good for the country, we aren't going to elect you again. And by golly, that's the only thing they really listen to. They'll throw their grandmother under a bus if it means that they get elected again.
Yeah, I know.
So we need to let them know.
I kind of keep harping on this a little bit because I have seen firsthand the leverage that sponsors have, even at the little small market radio thing. They get news stories quashed that they don't like. They get us to play records that we wouldn't play. I mean, the leverage that a sponsor has is a lot greater than most people realize. And if we had the means to get FAIRtax on some of these major media outlets as a sponsor, we could do a lot. And if we could make this marketplace successful, there's a real good chance that we'll have that.
We'll have a lot more revenue, and that would actually be something to look at. But I would do the first things of getting these better social media and social outreach in place. And then we could go on to doing that or doing op-eds. Like there's a company I talked to that charges $5,000 a month, but they'll guarantee you they'll get you in Fortune, they'll get you in these various magazines. An article you write.
Yes.
What kind of benefit would that create if we were being regularly in all of these magazines? The Wall Street Journal, huge.
That would be incredible. So you could write chairman's reports all day long about that and get into a little wider audience than you currently have.
Absolutely. Well, we would be able to reach out to lots and lots more people, and with the credibility of the publication. Okay. And that's really critical. But I just look at all these opportunities, and I wish that my parents had been smarter and had bought, whatever when they were investing. And I had the independent wealth to do that.
All right. Well, I tell you, remind everybody again, the web address is fairtaxmarketplace.com. It is active, up and running now. There's not a whole lot there. There is a place if you need printer ink cartridges. There's a vendor there that sells those. If you need a printer ink cartridge, you can go there and support the FAIRtax. But hopefully we can get this thing going and can do some of the great things that you've got in mind. And I say we've got less than a minute left here. So again, I do want to thank you for your time and your willingness to help co-host FAIRtax Power Radio. We'll again wish Ron well and hope he's back with us soon. And again, Steve Hayes, President AFFT, thank you again so much for your time. And remind everybody to join the 1040 Club. Let's do that. Yeah. I think everybody that really like to see this happen, if you go to our website, fairtax.org, and hit join, and then join the 1040 Club. What that means is every month, $10.40 comes off your credit card. And it's immensely helpful to our organization because it helps us maintain things, but it also gives us the ability to do some of these other things we've discussed. So please go to fairtax.org and join. Okay, well, we're about out of time. You know how this works. We are the FAIRtax guys. I'm Bob Paxton. And I'm Steve Hayes. Remind you again that the FAIRtax is the only truly fair tax, and once you understand it, you're going to demand it.
So what would you do for her?
We've got several programs that will help her. We just need to find out how much she makes. But the good news is, the less she does, the more we can help.
Yeah.
If I may, with the FAIRtax, we wouldn't even tax her income. So the more she makes, the more she has.
But still, a consumption tax could eat up a lot of her income.
Which is why at the beginning of every month, we're actually going to give back all that she pays in taxes on basic necessities.
You're going to give her back her taxes?
Every month. On everything taxed on basic necessities. But we're also going to give it back to you and to every American citizen.
Why?
Well,